A Traitor to Humanity by Elton Gar. As the youngest member of the bridge crew of the Icarus, Mike's job was monitoring backup systems. He ran diagnostics on the backup life support systems, made sure that the docking rings got rotated regularly, and all the other things that didn't matter in interstellar space. The most important and least productive part of his job was monitoring the communications for signs of non-human communication. Finding alien life was the reason Mike had joined the fleet. After 200 years of faster-than-light travel, most people had given up on finding intelligent life. Humans were alone in the galaxy. Those people didn't understand just how big the galaxy was, and Mike was still convinced they were somewhere. Perhaps still painting on cave walls, or a few years away from learning to use radio waves. But while he believed, Mike still didn't get excited when he saw the signal. It could be the most important discovery in human history, but it was far more likely to earn him another round of light-hearted ridicule. There were plenty of things in the universe that could create patterns without intelligence having to be involved. Still, he wasn't authorized to decide the importance of the signal. His job was to report any signal, and as boring as interstellar space travel was, he wouldn't be interrupting anything. So he stood up and said,
"Captain, I have an odd signal."
"Route it to my chair,"
Captain Poole said, and he put down his book. No one else on the crew even looked up. Mike transferred the data to the captain, who looked at it for a moment and then back at Mike. Finally, he picked up a tablet and walked over to Dr. Leck, who sat in the corner monitoring the bridge crew for signs of disunity. She didn't stand as the captain approached, forcing the captain to bend over her as she looked at the signals. The stern woman then stood and said,
"Computer, seal the command section by Standing Order 7 of the President of Earth."
Mike sat behind the small desk, trying to escape the vision of both Dr. Leck and the captain. He had known that every section of the ship could be sealed off in case of hull breach, but he couldn't imagine why it wasn't the captain who gave the order. The captain looked at Dr. Leck for a few seconds as the entire bridge went silent. He then turned so his back was to the governmental representative and said,
"Everything that happens from now until those doors open is classified above top secret. If we cannot follow Standing Order 7, we will all be executed. You have all been told that humans have never discovered intelligent life. That is untrue. We have discovered 7 species that are undeniably intelligent."
Mike had to hold on to the side of his chair. He had always imagined other people, and he had been certain that if they discovered them, everyone would know. How could you keep a secret that big? It seemed he was about to find out.
Of those 7, 3 were in the hunter-gatherer stage. Those who have studied them believe that is the longest technological stage, except for our interstellar stage, we hope. Knowledge of their location and existence has been restricted for their own protection until such a time as they can become useful to us.
Dr. Leck looked at Mike and then typed something into her computer. She did that often, but since the computer was secure even from the captain, no one knew what it meant. Mike wondered if she was recording the look on his face when the captain had said, "useful to us."
The 4th had a handful of small city-states in particularly fertile areas of the planet, and was expanding. We believe that with no major complications, they would become a global civilization, similar to humans, before we discovered faster-than-light travel. We are focusing on making certain their culture is compatible with ours. The 5th and 6th had significant technology. Both were discovered thanks to signals similar to the ones we have discovered. Our interaction with the 7th is the reason for our standing orders. Their technology was significantly more advanced than ours, but they had not discovered the trick to faster-than-light travel. They were also an arrogant and distrustful species who insisted we give them the technology. It is believed they plan to steal the faster-than-light technology, then conquer and enslave us. So we used our singular advantage. We used asteroids from distances they could not travel. It took 23 years to destroy their fleet, drive their species back to their homeworld, and bombard it until their technology was gone. This signal is from the 8th species. We are expected to follow the standing orders. We cannot risk an unfriendly species discovering faster-than-light travel. Dr. Leck is here in part to ensure that we follow the President's orders. We will create and send a virus to their planet. It will cause an epidemic that, while painless, will hopefully halt technological advancement until our scientists can determine if they are dangerous.
From what Mike knew of the government of Earth, it would be impossible for anyone to meet standards most humans couldn't. But Mike was just one person, and the least important member of the command crew. The most he could do was refuse to follow orders, and if he was respectful enough and didn't stop them, Dr. Lek might not call for his execution. But he'd be kicked out of the fleet and be dropped off on one of the less habitable colony worlds, where he would be lucky to survive. He didn't have to decide immediately. The Icarus could go 30 times the speed of light, but space was huge, and they had weeks before they arrived. Being trapped in the command section made the next weeks exhausting, in part because he wasn't the only one who was upset by the orders. The entire crew and even the captain spent their free time looking for a better solution and complaining about the situation. Like always, Mike had the least to do, so he spent his time deciphering the signals coming from the planet. The first thing he did was write a simple algorithm that let them watch the videos. Seeing the aliens didn't make it easier. They were humanoid only in the vaguest sense of the word. They had appendages for manipulating things in their environment, and several organs he assumed were for gathering sensory information. Their mouths were easiest to identify, but only in so much as there was a hole they put food into. But he found an odd elegance in their movement, and their intelligence meant their actions were varied and complex. After a couple of days, he began to understand the broad strokes of what he was watching. It was TV, and not that different from what he often watched on his downtime. There was a cooking show he assumed was popular since it seemed to be played often. A series of what he assumed were news shows with two or more of the creatures, not moving and talking with still images or videos, periodically interrupting them. But without context and no sound, the images meant little. Often they were pictures of other aliens, though sometimes there was a video of a fire or other disasters. The sound took a little longer, though at first it was an alien language that meant nothing to Mike. But eventually the computer began to translate words. They still seemed random, but from time to time a few would link into a phrase that almost made sense. During that time, Mike, along with some of the other bridge crew, began to understand the aliens' technology. They were nearly as advanced as humans, with the obvious exclusion of any technology that let them move faster than light. That was enough to make it impossible for them to win a war. You couldn't win a war when the enemy could move faster than your weapons. Mike's best plan was to learn enough to convince Dr. Lek that the virus that was currently being prepared wouldn't be necessary. But he wasn't convinced that was possible. The other option was one that would almost certainly get him killed. He wrote a program that, once they were close enough, would let him use the ship-to-ship communicators to send a warning and what clues he had to how FTL worked. The discovery of faster-than-light travel had been an accident, but perhaps the bits he understood might help them make the same discovery. Mike wouldn't know if it worked because Dr. Lek would have him thrown out the airlock 5 minutes after he sent the message as a traitor to humanity. But perhaps one person standing up to the corrupt government of Earth could make a difference. And even if it didn't make a difference to the humans, the aliens weren't a lesser people. They were a logical people with an orderly society designed for the good of everyone in it. Humans had never quite succeeded at that level of egalitarianism. The best humans had done was to pioneer hundreds of colony worlds where people sent most of what they made to Earth to improve the wealth of those who could afford to live in paradise. More than once, Mike was ordered by one of the other crew to take the images off the monitors. Mike understood the hostility of the other members of the crew. Knowing less about the aliens would make killing them easier. Each time, Mike would turn off the main monitors for a few hours and then turn them back on. And with each cycle, more of the crew became interested in what he was watching. Until when Lieutenant Braitz told him to turn it off, several of the other people told him to shove off. Even the captain watched videos over people's shoulders. It was immediately after doing that the fourth time that he ordered the ship to cut its speed in half. The ship crawled forward until it landed on the side of the alien's moon. Commander Bix would then take a shuttle into the upper atmosphere and collect enough microbes to understand basic biology on the planet. That put an end to Mike's hope that they'd decide not to use the virus. But with so many signals from the planet, he could return one of his own. A simple signal in the alien's language that simply said,
"Keep this a secret."
Then, while everyone else was monitoring the shuttle to make sure it wasn't seen, Mike changed his message to read,
"Your people are in danger. I am a low-ranking officer on a ship from another world. We are monitoring your broadcasts. Please alert your leaders quietly.
Mike couldn't imagine a signal like that sent to a human population wouldn't reach the news in a few hours. But the aliens of this world didn't think the same way humans did. So far as he could see, they couldn't panic, and insanity was only caused by physical damage to the brain. Nothing happened. That either meant his plan was working perfectly, or it was failing entirely. Every few minutes, he changed the message, adding more information. The aliens were advanced enough to understand biological warfare. They might even find a cure for the disease if they had warning, but it seemed unlikely. But none of that would matter if humans could simply continue to harass them from so far away they couldn't do anything. So Mike transmitted everything in the ship's records about the FTL drive. He knew little of it and knew that key sections were redacted, but he hoped the alien scientists and engineers were smarter than he was. Once it was done, there wasn't anything to do but send more. He covered any science that might be useful: biology, chemistry, physics, and astronomy, all while convinced that any moment he would be discovered. Then the lights above all the doors on the ship turned red, and Dr. Lex stood up. She took a small file over to the captain, who said,
I am ordering the delivery of virus QUILL-19. This is my responsibility and no one else.
Mike sent Captain Poole's message down to the planet, along with a brief apology for not doing more. He then sat in silence with the rest of the crew as the shuttle launched. Then something happened Mike hadn't even considered. A half a dozen of the satellites turned towards the shuttle and launched missiles. The aliens had a few secrets themselves. A human pilot would have avoided the missiles easily. The autopilot wasn't meant for combat. A few minutes later, there was a powerful broadcast that was aimed at the general location of the ship. It said,
We do not seek war. We will allow you to leave. Do not return.
The captain listened to the message, then said,
Mike, I'll need to use your radio. They have clearly been monitoring your signal.
Dr. Lex stood up, anger on her face, but Lieutenant Braitz drew his weapon and told the woman to sit back down. Mike tapped in the code to transfer control of his program to the captain's chair. As it appeared on his screen, Captain Poole said,
If you want to send covert messages, lock your terminal.
Mike felt stupid for believing he had gotten away with anything. Captain Poole had known what he was doing the entire time. The captain then tapped the button and said in a clear, smooth voice,
This is Captain Jake Poole. We thank you for your mercy. I will order my ship to leave your system. In deference to you, we will do so with only thrusters. In return, I must insist you not to use that time to explore the science of faster-than-light travel and its connection to other dimensions.
Mike hadn't known about other dimensions, but the captain must have known and was giving them a hint, just like he was giving them time. Because intentional delay explained taking well over a year to get out of the system better than anything else. As Mike felt the first nudges of the ship's thrusters, Captain Poole said loudly enough for everyone on the bridge to hear,
I've been studying aliens since I became a captain and learned they existed. Something has been bothering me. None of the alien species we have met is very advanced. Even the most was a few hundreds years more advanced than us. I've only thought of one reason for that. We are not the only ones who have decided the best way to protect ourselves is to make sure no one gets too advanced. I even suspect that some in our government may have thought of the same thing. The signs I see suggest they believe that by keeping others down, they might survive longer. But for me, I'd want as many peoples as possible, thinking in as many ways as possible, all trying to find a solution. And I'd hope they have a few people who are moral enough to see through the propaganda and do the right thing, even though they would have to know the cost.
Author's note: I wrote this story several years ago, but over the last years, the idea of standing up against your own government has become far more interesting and far more complex of an idea. But the value of a short story like this one is to allow people to consider situations without delving too directly into them. Beyond that, I've always been interested in the Fermi paradox. It's a fairly complex idea, but it can be boiled down to the question, where is everyone, asked while looking at the stars for signs of life. The reason this is a paradox is that from what little we know of the universe, there should be other civilizations out there, but so far we have seen no sign of them. There are several ideas that may answer this, but one of the most scary to me is the one that I explore in this story. that it isn't a great filter that you might survive, but intelligence that has decided that allowing others to rise is too dangerous. And this is scary, because to me, at least in our modern context, it seems plausible. People with power aren't always interested in other people getting power. But the solution to that isn't to knock each other down trying to escape, but to work together, because in the end, most of the time doing the right thing and the pragmatic idea are closer together than people think. Elton Gar.